So we're going to look at how to use your watercolors. A lot of high school students tend to not like watercolor because it doesn't dry really fast. So you have to let things dry. So it requires some patience. And another reason is because it's transparent and it's not a poster paint. So it's not supposed to be painted on thickly. So a lot of beginning students will take their paint and they'll paint from here straight to their paper, and they usually want it really thick. Well, what happens is that dries and it gets sticky, and that's not really the intent of watercolor. Watercolor is meant to be transparent. It's supposed to be light. You can get some what's called saturated colors, which means it's really vibrant, but it takes some layering, it takes some patience. But let's look at this set. This is a cake pen set. This is a Crayola set, and the more expensive sets, the more like color pigment is in it. Crayola is actually a pretty good set, but you need to wet it to get it to activate it. And I like to puddle in my water so that it gets nice and soft, and I like to put a lot in here. This way I can get away with painting straight from the paint pan. Otherwise you have to create what are called washes, and that's where you're taking your paint and you're mixing it in water. So I've done some colors already. I'm going to let these set. You'll need some kind of tray. This is what's called a flower palette. You can get these at Daiso, which is that the Asian 99-cent store or dollar store. Sometimes they come in a set of 3 like this, like different sizes, and for really inexpensive. Or you can like get one of these. I believe Michael's, sometimes Dollar Tree has these for sale for $1. These are just painting palettes. I like this one a little bit better because there's more space, so you can use bigger brushes. So usually what I do to create a wash, I just grab some water. You don't want to pour water in unless you're making a lot of one color, but I just like to take my brush and kind of scoop in some water here. The more water you have, the harder it is to get a really vibrant color. So water is like the equivalent of adding white to a color. It lightens it up. So let's take my orange here. So my orange has been sitting here for a while, so it's nice and creamy on top. And the more I kind of scoop onto my brush, when I mix it into my water, the more vibrant it's going to be. So that's actually a pretty good vibrancy. I'm going to add more. And the more you add to this little bit of water, the more orange or the more vibrant of a color it'll be. So, and then I can always water it down. I'm going to take a purple actually. Mix this into here. It's a little light. Looks more pink than it does purple, but that's okay. And that's a little bit more vibrant. So when I'm painting, I'm most likely going to paint from this rather than here. So I usually just set this aside and use it when I need to. One thing I like to do is to clean my brush. You'll want to have a paper towel next to you so you can just kind of dab your brush onto it. So that all my colors kind of work together, I usually take my lightest color and I just take just a little bit of it and I mix it into my purple. And what this is doing, it's kind of connecting it. It's warming up my purple a little bit so that it relates to my orange. And it might not be something you see that's really obvious to you, but it's something that helps our eyes kind of connect the two colors together. So I'm going to get a little bit more orange. And I just want enough to where it stays purple, but now it has a little bit more of a orange kind of tint to it, because that orange kind of darkened it up. And I don't want to add enough where it changes the color dramatically, but by doing that, now these two colors are related to each other because they both have that little bit of orange in it. Now I can take these colors as is and I can add to a drawing or painting. So I have some of these color spheres here. I do want to be careful about when I'm painting with on top of pencil, because the water will make the pencil more permanent into the paper, and it'll also dirty at my brush the more I rub over the pencil. So you want to make sure you rinse out your brush and clean it before you paint on top of it. So this is a nice way to kind of add just a little bit of color to your artwork without having to do a whole lot of painting, especially if your shadows are already in place with your pencil. You can just paint directly on top, and now you have a monochromatic object with the shadows already put in place with your graphite. The paper you have is just drawing paper, so you're going to see a lot of like what's called buckling. The paper is going to get all like wavy. So as you're putting water down, the paper is expanding and stretching out and creating all these like little waves in your paper. They do go away after a while. Like if you dry them, if you let it dry, it'll start to flatten out a bit. You can always set like heavy books on top of it if you really want to weigh it down. There is actual like watercolor paper. Is XL, the Canson XL is a brand I like for student grade. They there's cold press and hot press, and all that means is cold press, there's like a texture to it. Hot press, it's super flat and smooth. But this paper, it's meant to withstand water a little bit. And so I have this one here. So if I take my colors, it's not going to buckle the same way. And if I want to lighten up an area, I can just add water. This technique works better on this paper because it doesn't absorb the water as quickly, so I have time to add water. On this paper, you have to work very fast to do that, and I'll show you that in a minute. But see, like the paper hasn't warped or buckled. It will, the more water I add to it, it will eventually. And then there are higher quality papers that are a lot more expensive, but really you only get those if you're getting more serious about it. But the Canson XL paper is pretty good. I use that in my classroom with students. So if I want to, let's say I want to blend some of these colors together, just gonna scoot this over. I'm going to, I always start with my lighter color. And you want to work fairly quickly. I can add water to it. So just cleaning my brush and adding water. It doesn't, depending on how much water or how much paint you have, but you will see like some darker areas here. That's because the color is pulling in that area. And as long as the paint is still wet and shiny, I can still add color to this. And what's the cool thing about watercolor is like wet goes into wet. So like when I put this purple in, it bled into this clear area that I had put in place. Once it starts to dry, I can't exactly do that. So definitely add some color. This might be an easier way to add color to some of your assignments rather than like the color pencil. You can mix colors and just have a little bit more fun with it. I don't paint from the straight from the palette just because it's too thick. And if I do, let's see, if I do paint from here, I usually like to have a plate. So if I do paint from here, I could just go straight into here, put some of my color, and then I just dip my brush into the water just one time, and then I add the water to this. This way it dilutes it just a little bit, but it still holds the main color. And this way, what it does is that the paint won't dry sticky. You don't want that to dry shiny or sticky because then when you go to put your artwork somewhere, other paintings and drawings stick to it. So you could do that to get a more vibrant color. But again, the whole point of watercolor is to be transparent. It's supposed to be see-through. You should be able to see through it. And then you can layer colors. So this one's a little dry now. So I can take a little bit of that purple and I can layer over it. And by layering over it, I can still see my orange through it, which is kind of nice. And it's kind of like blending the colors together without actually mixing it in the plate here. So that's just a little fast demo on watercolor. Play around with it, test it out, see what you think, and try adding color to one of your assignments. One last thing I forgot to mention, watercolors you don't need to really clean out of the tray. So this tray I can just set aside and let that dry, especially if it's something I'm going to use again in the future. So here's actually one of my watercolor trays that I use regularly. And all you do is you just take a brush with water, and this is like the cool thing about it, it just reactivates the paint. So I can swirl this in here, just a few drops, not too much, and my paint is reactivated. If I mix any colors here on this palette, I don't have to worry about trying to remix it again, especially if I have like quite a bit of it, because then I can just let it dry and then add some water later. So excuse me, that definitely has a plus, because acrylic paint doesn't have that capability. Once the paint dries, it dries. But watercolor, that's the really neat thing, because you can keep your trays exactly how they are and then reuse this paint. So the paint tends to last a really long time.